So we need to start by having you share with us the war and the branch of service that you were involved with, what your rank was, and where you served.
Uh, Initially, my first assignment in the United States Air Force was in Japan as an occupation person in Itazuki, Japan, actually. And I was in Itazuki until the Korean War broke out. And we were right there at the start of the Korean War. And our primary mission initially was to help all the refugees coming out of Korea, the Americans that were living in Korea. And we set up housing at Itazuki and temporary facilities to be able to handle them for a period of time.
Okay.
Until they shipped home.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted in the Air Force.
And what year was that?
That was in 1947.
And where were you living at the time?
I was living in Babylon, West Babylon, Long Island.
And why did you enlist?
I enlisted to get an education. I loved airplanes, living next to Republican in Grumman on Long Island. And I felt I needed to get some training in aviation, and I could sign up in the Air Force for airplane engine mechanic school as my primary focus. And that was a contract I had with the Air Force when I enlisted.
Do you recall your first days in service and what it felt like? How old were you at the time?
I was 18 when I enlisted, and I turned 19 when I went through the gas chamber practice for chemical warfare. That was interesting.
What was your boot camp experience like, or the training that you
Well,
got?
it was interesting. It was a little bit tough because I was from New York, and you're in Texas, and the flight marcher was from Dallas, Texas. He didn't like Easterners and New Yorkers, so we went through anybody that's from New York, and I think there were a few people, but we had one guy that was a bank robber. He was running away from the crime and joined the Air Force, and then got caught about halfway through, and that was the end of him. He disappeared.
What happened to him?
Oh, he got discharged. So, and he suffered for his crime.
Oh my goodness. What were your instructors like, other than the guy who didn't like New Yorkers?
Well, he was actually a very good flight marcher, but tough. He didn't fool around with most of us, but I found actually the training was very easy. I worked as a kid doing concrete blocks, building cellars and basements, and helping my father build homes. And so I was in physical shape. I did not have any trouble at all in boot camp.
That's great. So the war that you served in was can you just restate that? It was the Korean War?
The Korean War, when the Korean War broke out, yes.
And where did you go?
Well, initially I was at Itazuki, and we were one of the air bases that was first in action. Actually, in fact, some of the airplanes were shot down when the Korean War started. It was done by the 68th Fighter Bomber, or a patrol squadron that we had at Itazuki, and they shot these planes down. So we were in it right from day one, actually.
Do you remember arriving and what that felt like?
Arriving in Japan was interesting because the troop ship, it took 13 days on the troop ship to get there. And we landed in Yokohama, and we processed into Japan in Yokohama. And I remember waking up in the morning, and I walked out to get a breath of fresh air, and there was Fujiyama, off in the distance. The whole mountain it was a clear day. Oh, it was just beautiful. I couldn't believe it. It was really nice.
And so your job was what?
Well, I worked originally, I was an assistant crew chief on P-51s, which were the primary aircraft in the 8th Fighter Bomber Wing. And that later changed to F-80s. But then they had to go back to P-51s because they lacked experience. We transitioned into the F-80 about 30 to 60 days before the Korean War. So the pilots did not have any hours at all in the F-80, and they were flying combat missions. That's tough. That's a tall order.
And what was your job?
My job, at the time the Korean War broke out, I worked in 8th Maintenance Squadron. I was in the maintenance squadron. And I did a lot of electrical work, worked on electrical systems. And I was also trained in radar, but we didn't have any radar on the P-51s, so they used me for everything. I was what you would call an all-around grunt that worked on everything.
Did you see combat?
I was in Korea under combat conditions, yes.
So what was that like? Were there a lot of casualties in your unit?
We were fortunate. We did lose one guy from these little light aircraft that they use for bombing airstrips when we were in. We were in North Korea at the time, Pyongyang, and this guy dropped a bomb, and this kid had won the Airman of the Month award, and he was going to go back to Japan for a 3-day pass R&R, and a piece of shrapnel hit him, and that was it. It killed him instantly. He was standing up. If he'd have been laying down, he'd have been all right. But that's...
So he was on the ground?
Oh yeah, he was in his tent. He was just packing. That's all he was doing.
Oh, wow.
And everybody else was laying down and going to sleep.
What were some other memorable experiences from your days?
Well, that's a little hard to answer. There's so many experiences, but I remember getting shot up twice in a Jeep when I used to go get parts to fix aircraft. And this was kind of the guerrilla warfare. When we ran up the peninsula after the Incheon invasion, we left behind a lot of North Koreans. And they were all living in the hills and mountains. And if you were driving anywhere in Korea at that time, you always were subject to being attacked. And they would steal your boots. That was a big target. And then the ammo or the weapon that you had really was no good to them because their rounds wouldn't really fit properly in the weapon. So it was mostly clothing or things that they could steal from you.
Were you injured?
I was lucky. I did it. I picked up about 6 rounds both times in a Jeep. And I didn't even know I got shot at because when you're driving in Korea, it was all gravel road. And you get all this pinging and bang and bang, and you don't pay any attention to noise. And it was just some rounds hit the Jeep, and the first sergeant's Jeep that I had, he got very angry. He said, "Where the heck are you going to get shot up? What are you, crazy?" So I got into a little trouble over that, but it was something I didn't even know that went on.
So what sort of injuries did you suffer?
I was fortunate. The only injury that I got was from working in a special assignment the first month of the war, working on P-51 engines that were shipped over from the States, where they gathered a whole bunch of engines and they shipped them over, and I had to work special on that to fit accessories and do any trims on the engines. And I had to work with chemicals, and I was working barehanded, no protection, in carbon tet and trichloroethylene. And I got terrible rashes and skin affliction from it, and the doctors didn't know what to do with it. So I was fortunate that in the MASH unit I was in, there was a black doctor, and he had some mixture that his family used to use. I guess it was either in Alabama or Mississippi, and he fixed that up, and it worked. It actually alleviated the stuff. So the old home remedy that he knew, it worked. So I was very pleased with his result.
And this was in Korea or
Yeah,
in Japan?
well, this was in the MASH unit. It was in Korea.
Okay.
Yeah, when I broke down with all the rash and everything.
Were you in an integrated unit?
Yeah,
then?
it became integrated in 1949, and that was an interesting thing. I think a worthwhile story to tell because I don't have a problem with integration at all. And I remember we had a young black man that came into our outfit, and he was the only one that was moved in initially. And he had an adenoid problem. When he tried to go to sleep, he had this, sort of a cackling sound you get from adenoids. And it was one night when a armament guy come back. He was a staff sergeant, I remember, and he was trying to go to sleep, and the staff sergeant was choking him. I guess he was going to do him in. He was all drunk and everything, and he woke me up, and then I intervened and said, "This is crazy. Do you realize what you're doing?" And I'm holding him down, and then after a little bit of calming down, I asked the black boy, you have the right to file a grievance against the sergeant for what he was doing. And there were a number of people that got up with me that would testify that this was going on. And he said, no, that I hate that, to get into that kind of trouble. And I said, okay. Then I talked to the sergeant. I said, you outrank me, but in this case, I'll put you to prison where you never get sunlight again. I said, so don't you ever come near this person again. And if he comes to me and complains about you, that's it. You're a history. So that's how that ended up. And the young black man was really good at what he did. He did not want to press charges.
So what happened after that?
We just let it go. After that, so it was not an incident. Mm-hmm. And we eventually integrated, and it worked out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's fascinating.
It was an unusual situation, but that happened. That
Probably not as unusual as we might think.
No, it happened a lot more often than we realized. That's true.
Yeah. Huh. While you were in the service, were you able to stay in touch with your family? These questions are kind of about life in the service.
Oh yeah, I used to send. I probably wrote a lot more initially when I was overseas, but as time goes on, it gets less and less, and when you're in a combat area, you can't talk about it because they'll just censor it, and that's the end of it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So communication does, at least for me, it died off a little bit.
Did you have a big family back home?
I had a brother and sister, and my brother, he was in Germany. He was there when the Berlin airlift was going on, so he was in Germany when I was in Japan.
Did you stay in touch with each other at all during the war?
Not really. Not with my brother. We didn't really talk to each other while he was in service. I always kept Mom apprised of things. I remember sending pictures home one time. I watched some practice napalm bombing. Our P-51s, we used to rig up the P-51s for napalm, and they took us to the range so we could watch how this stuff operated. And I had some photos and stuff, and I remember sending them home. And then I thought about it after I had done that, unfortunately. I said, this was dumb. I shouldn't really show Mom that kind of stuff. So that happened that way. But then I told her it was no problem. Nothing happened to anybody, but it took a little while to unravel that.
Right. And in terms of life for you in the service, things like food and, just the daily routine of it. What was that like?
I found in peacetime in Japan, we had a very good setup. I really loved Itazuki. I used to play ball, and we were champions one year and all that stuff. So it was just a lot of fun, and food was good. We used to have midnight chow because of alert missions. There were a lot of times pilots would have to fly, and crew people had to be available for the airplanes when they come back after patrols. And so there was always, the chow hall was open for midnight chows. So a lot of us ate 4 meals a day.
Did you feel particularly stressed? Was it very stressful for you being over in
No,
Japan?
I did not. I did not feel stressed at all. No.
Why do you think not?
I don't know. I think it was just the guys, everybody. Although I have to admit that there were, after the Korean War broke out, there were 6 people that I knew personally that committed suicide about 1 or 2 months after the war started. And the reason, I'm only surmising this, but the reason I think was that a lot of them had been in Japan for almost 2 years, and some maybe over 2 years, when the war broke out, and they were automatically kept there, and that probably added big, unknown to how long they're going to be there.
So they had expected to be discharged?
I suspect, or go home.
Right.
And they didn't, and it was, it was sad because the one staff sergeant that I knew, and I liked him. He was a very nice person, but he did himself in. It was scary. I have to admit that I didn't like that part, but all I could do was surmise. He had been in Japan a long time.
And how did your commanding officers handle things like that?
I really don't know. I didn't.
Was there any discussion, or?
I don't recall any. No, the Korean War. When the Korean War broke out, we were not informed much at all. Anything that we learned, we got out of Stars and Stripes. That was pretty well read. But the officers didn't communicate at all, really, to speak.
And
of.
So Stars and Stripes was how you found out about what was going on?
Yeah, and which was very, very truncated anyway, because there was a lot of politics in the Korean War, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
As I found out later in life, I didn't realize how goofed up everything was.
Was there, this is a good question, was there something special that you did for good luck? Sort of a talisman that maybe you wore something, or?
No, I don't think I had anything that I can recall. I never, I'm not, I was a baseball nut, but I didn't have that habit of special talismans or anything like that. No, nothing.
And how did people entertain themselves? Were there entertainers, or?
I never
shows?
got to go to entertainment, but we did have, Marilyn Monroe came over, Joe DiMaggio. There were a lot of, but I never got to go because on airstrips and some of the locations we were at, it was kind of remote, so we were not part of the more of the Army was covered more on that.
So you went to Japan first, then the Korean War broke out, and then you went to Korea?
Yes.
How long were you in Korea?
Probably about a year, off and on, because we used to call ourselves the Fleeing Fifth. I was part of the 5th Air Force because I was in when Pusan Perimeter that was at Daegu, and we got chased out of there. So we fled and went back to Japan. Then I went in on the Incheon landing, then went up to Pyongyang. We got chased out of there, and we went back to Yongbyon, and then the Chinese came down far enough that they chased us back again. So it was kind of crazy.
I would imagine so. Did you? Well, you had leave though. Were you able to go on leave from time to time?
I never took leave while I was in the war.
And that's customary?
I guess. I wouldn't know where to go. There's no such thing. It's just go back to Japan, which I was familiar with.
All right. Okay, we're recording again. Okay, then. Anything of a humorous nature from your experiences?
Probably yes. Probably hundreds of things that I tend to remember those humorous experiences more than I do anything else.
And is there anything in particular that you?
Nothing special. What most GIs. I think that one of the things that we did was we drank too much. We always found ways of getting beer and things like that because one of the humorous things that happened was in Yeongdong-po. This was after the Incheon landing. We were going through and setting up a base right next to Yeongdong-po, and the GIs found a brewery in Yeongdong-po. Oh boy, that was great because they filled up jerry cans and were bringing the stuff back. And I remember tasting the beer, and it was terrible. I didn't really like it. But anyway, boy, they were drinking that stuff, and then all of a sudden the word comes down. I guess somebody found out about it. They said they found the body of a North Korean in the vat. So you've been drinking beer that was a North Korean. It was.
You think that was true?
I think they made that up to get people to stop drinking the beer.
Oh, that's fine. After the service, these questions are about after the service. Do you recall the day that your service ended and where you were at the time?
Oh yes, I was stationed at Westover Air Force Base, and I was engaged. I was going to get married later in the year, and so I was very active when I left the service. But I had one of the best jobs in the Air Force when I was at Westover, because when I came back, I got assigned to a flight simulator function on the F-86D, and the D was loaded with 24 rockets, and this protected New York from bombing attacks. We were the last stop to kill anything that got into the States, and the simulator was a full representation of the aircraft, how you operate in an attack mode, and navigation, everything. So it was really a good job.
Wow, it sounds very
interesting. It was just absolute fun, really working it. I worked many long hours, but it was great.
What year was that? When was that? When your service
I
ended?
started on a simulator in I got back from overseas in the fall of 1951 is when I come back. I was shipped back. And the reason was, I think, because I had a lot of service before overseas, so they were trying to get people rotated. That I think part of it was the suicide rate, because of a lot of guys falling into that category. And I'm sure they were thinking about that when they started rotating people. But then when I went back, I went to advanced radar school, and I did very well there, and that's how I got assigned to the simulator setup. So I ran the section, set it all up and everything, and and ran a section.
Huh.
That was just great.
Now, you had said earlier that you enlisted so that you could get an education.
Yes.
Tell me about that. How long did you stay in the service before you left and went
Oh, okay.
to
I
college?
spent a little over 6 years in the Air Force because part of that was they added time to my original enlistment was 3 years. But then when the Korean War broke out, I was there, and so they added an extra year, and so I re-enlisted while I was in Japan because it made sense. With the added time, I only re-enlisted really for 2 more years, and all the travel pay and everything else I put in the bank and saved it. So I saved money, and that's how I bought my car when I got back.
What kind of car?
It was a '51 Chevy.
You
Brand
still
new.
remember?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. No, that was really worthwhile. And I paid cash for the car. I didn't have any payments or anything.
How much did it cost?
About $1,500 at that time. And that was brand new. But the experience that I got when I was at Westover, I took some college courses while I was there, and I realized that, God, the profs, the math prof told me I should go to school. I should go to college. And she says, because says you're totally capable of passing. So that's what I did. I ended up going to the University of Massachusetts.
Oh, you didn't go back to New York?
No, because I had lived at Westover, and met my wife, who lived in Amherst, in the Pelham area actually, and we got married, and then that's how I ended up going to UMass.
So did you get your bachelor's degree
Yeah, I got
there
a degree in electrical engineering, control theory. And that I ended up working for United Technologies, Hamilton Standard, and that's where I retired from. So my whole career carried on from what I learned in the service.
What did you do at Hamilton?
Oh, I was an avionics designer and project manager.
And what did you work on?
Worked on 747s. I worked on all the commercial aircraft that switched. I worked on military aircraft, such as the B-58. I did design work on the XB-70, environmental controls. So I did control systems for aircraft all those years.
Were there any particularly close friendships that you made in the service that you continued with afterward?
Not really. Just never. I've met very few. I only remember one that was a radio operator, and then but the trouble is, when the Korean War came, they broke up. Everybody that was in, that I knew at Itazuki, we all got splintered. We all went different directions. And I don't know, you were less apt to make friends once you broke off all the old contacts. It's one of those things that happens.
Right, I understand. But after, did you obviously you joined a veterans organization?
Yeah, that was late. I'm Johnny come lately when it came to the VFW because, I don't know, it was too political. A lot of the politics really irked me because I had to, oh gosh, you wouldn't believe some of the work I had to do with Hamilton. I had to take care of stuff at Boeing. And there were a couple of engineers I was working with out of Boeing that were members of the John Birch Society. And gee whiz, they wanted to hang Eisenhower and everything. I couldn't believe it. And I remember talking to my supervisor. I said, I can't stand these people. I just don't like the way that they talk. And he says, wow, we got business, you got it. They like you. You got to stick with them. So I stuck it out. But boy, I sure didn't like it.
Wow, that must have been pretty difficult for you.
Well, it's just part of the life.
But they were customers.
Yes. So you have to be good.
Now, how do you think? I mean, did you reflect on it at all today? How your military experience influenced your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Oh, I keep up with military things. I watch the TV. I spend more time in watching the military channel and stuff. And I marvel at leadership. When the Band of Brothers was put out by Spielberg and Tom Hanks, I think it was one of the best shows ever in terms of leadership. How people can lead in all kinds of situations, no matter what happens. Even if you lose all your senior officers, the guys can still function. And to me, that was a big difference in World War II. It made a big difference against the Germans and the Japanese.
And how did that, do you think, now inform how you functioned and went about building your career as a civilian?
The military experience was very positive for me. My experiences on maintenance and working with systems on aircraft turned out that I did a lot of work on the B-58 and programs that they had supplied equipment for. And I went and solved a lot of their problems of things I learned in the service.
That's on the technical side.
Yes. Yes.
What about the non-technical, the sort of what you would call the softer side of being in business, your relationships with other people, with supervisors, with people you supervised, with customers?
I had no problem at all, except when I got out of the service. I remember I worked as a quality control engineer for, and this was before I even got a degree. But that's what I got assigned to for F.W. Sickles, which was in Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts. And I remember I got into trouble a few times with the women foremen that would, I don't know, they got very emotional about when you found a defect in the production line, they would get very emotional. And I wouldn't stand for that. Well, being in front of the vice president a few times, I learned to be a lot more objective and understand. That I did have a problem because I was so used to, I don't know, when I wanted something, I got it in the service. I mean, as a supervisor, that's the way it is in the military. But that isn't the way civilian life works. You have to work things a lot more delicately.
It sounds like you were able to.
Yeah, and I had no problem at all with that. I learned very quickly.
Sure.
On that.
Now, when did you retire from Hamilton?
1991 was when I retired.
Okay. And had you gone for any advanced degree or?
I did. I was going to get I was trying to get my master's when I was at Hamilton, but I was traveling so much, troubleshooting programs that they designed, that I couldn't keep up with the master's work because I wasn't there most of the time.
Yeah.
So I foregone. I got a few courses under me, but that was it.
Mm-hmm. How did your service and military experience affect, if at all, other parts of your life? You're the father of 6 children and grandfather of 4. Do you think it had any influence over how you think about life in general?
No, I think my father had a big influence on how I thought, being tolerant. I don't know, I just didn't have trouble.
What was your father's experience? Why do you say that?
Well, he never had much. I mean, he learned everything from books. And because when he, in the 1920s, when he was in school in New York, uh, his mother broke a violin over his head because he didn't want to practice. So he ran away from home and he went fishing down in Cape May, New Jersey. And then finally came home and everything, but he didn't finish high school. But he did contracting work and things like that, but everything he learned out of books. These, what they call Ordell books. He used to have those, the whole library of stuff. He was a good plumber. He knew how to build houses, foundations, everything. And during the war, he ended up working for Colesman Instrument Corporation in New York. And he ran, as foreman, he ran one of the production lines for the Colesman altimeter. And there had to be a Colesman altimeter on every Air Force aircraft. It was mandatory to have that on there. So he did a good job during the war.
World War II.
Yeah.
Was he from? Did he come over from Hungary?
He came when he was maybe about 8 or 10 years old. 1913 is the year he came, and went through Ellis Island and all that stuff. And that took a little while to verify because I couldn't get it out of Ellis Island. And what happens is that all the manifests were all handwritten, and they spelt the name wrong. And my oldest daughter, found that out, and when I verified everything, then now I got all the data.
Great. Well, is there anything, Art, that we haven't covered that you would like to add about your military war experience?
Well, I can't really. I never considered anything that I did in the military as unusual, or it was just, to me, just a job, and you try to do a good job when you were assigned, activities. So I never had any hand-to-hand combat with the enemy or anything like that. But I felt that I did get good training, and I've used it all my life. Because when I was program manager in military programs, it worked good. Because I did run a program in Europe for a while on the EFA program, and that was on flight controls and helping the German company out. As it turned out, I found out the Germans were a lot smarter than I ever thought because of all the things they did. It's funny how I think that one of the biggest problems that I had was, over the years, I found out that in the military, we were ignorant of other countries, technically, of what their capabilities were. We didn't do a good job on teaching our troops that, boy, you really got to shake with it, or else you got problems. We never were really trained that way.
And how do you think that would have affected things?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it would have been smarter if we do more about the capabilities of our adversaries, if you will. We certainly had trouble with the Chinese, their methods that they used and everything else. We had, there was one of the best pilots the Air Force ever had was a man named Joe Rogers. And he was in my outfit, and I knew him when I first went to Japan. But he rigged up a 40 millimeter shell, a casing, and made a whistle out of it and mounted it on a P-51. Mm-hmm. And when he used to dive in on strafing runs, this whistle would cause the Chinese to leave their bunkers and go out in the open. Then the other planes would come in and napalm them. And they just really, it was very clever, the idea that he had, because the Chinese were scared to death of that whistle.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Did they think it was one of their own?
No, it's just their superstitions that they have or something. The whistle, I don't know. I know where he got the information from, but it worked.
Wow, that's great. Anything else?
No, I can't think of